Flats Oral History Project. I'm interviewing Jerry San Pietro. My name's Hannah Nordhaus. We're in my house in Boulder because Jerry lives in Cripple Creek, right?
Yes.
Which is a long drive, and he was up here for a roof clog meeting. And it is the 7th of November, 2005. So Jerry, to get started, if you just want to tell me a little bit about yourself, about your background, when you were born, where, what your family did, schooling, that sort of thing.
I was born in Denver, Colorado. I'm adopted. Went to Catholic school until the 9th grade, and then my family moved to Frederick, Colorado, and I went to Longmont High School. Right out of high school, I got married, started a family, needed a good job, and went to Rocky Flats. They paid the most then.
So you were like 18 years old or something?
18, yeah.
Wow.
So I really don't know much about my family. I was able to find my birth mother and learn who my birth father was. So I did get to meet her before she passed away. We had about 3 years together before she passed away. And all my life she lived within a half a mile of me, and we didn't know it.
Oh, really? Wow. So was that reunion, that was a positive thing in your life?
Yes, because I always wondered, an adoptee, I guess, always wonders, you know, who were their real parents, what were they like, what kind of diseases am I susceptible to, what's my health going to be like when I get older. So when I found her, or my wife found her, it answered a lot of those questions for me.
And your adoptive parents, what did they do for work?
My dad came over from Italy, and my mother was from Kansas. My dad operated a nightclub out in by Commerce City on Vasquez Boulevard. He operated that for many years, and then retired from that. Didn't like retirement, so he bought another one out in Frederick, Colorado, and that's when we moved out there, and I went to high school in Longmont.
And he ran that for a long time?
He ran that for a few years until his health started failing, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop this real quick. Okay, so what year did you start at Rocky Flats?
1966, November.
And what was your job there?
Hired in as a janitor. My uncle worked there at the time. He was one of the original hirees at Rocky Flats. He was hired in like 1953. So he told me about it. He said that, you know, they pay good. So I went out there and I hired in as a janitor. I was a janitor for probably 6 months, maybe is all. And then I took some night courses in chemistry and became a lab tech. I was a lab tech for about a year. Yeah, about a year. And then they had the big fire on Mother's Day. And they needed a lot of radiation monitors. So I switched over to radiation monitor. I thought, well, I'd rather be finding it than cleaning it. So, and nothing moved without a monitor having to be there, so they naturally got the highest pay on the plant site. So that's when I became a radiation monitor, and that was my primary job for the rest of my career.
And you retired in 1995?
I retired in 95.
So did your duties as a radiation monitor change over those years?
Oh, greatly, yeah. When I first went in, we just had, well, what we had in the fire was Army gas masks that were surplus from the Army. They were carbon activated, so you got carbon in your eyes, and you couldn't see much in them. They had no adaptation for glasses, and I need glasses. So what they would do is they'd take me in and they'd say, Now, you stand in this spot and people will bring things to you to check and you just tell them what it is. Don't move because you'll get lost. And at break time, they'd come and get me and lead me out. That would be unheard of towards the end of the times. Towards the end, we had to go to RCT school, which was much more elaborate, much more educational than what we ever had known in the past.
Okay, let me stop this again. We're back on.
Okay.
Tell me, the '69 fire then was your first trial by fire.
Right. And I knew nothing about radiation monitoring. They gave me an instrument, said if it clicks, it's hot, and if it doesn't, it's cold. Go in there and tell people when it's hot and cold. That was my training, to be a radiation monitor. It was scary because I couldn't see, and I depended on other people to get me out if I ever needed to get out. So the training wasn't very extensive in the beginning. They needed bodies. Later on, they gave us some training, and that helped, but it still wasn't really good training until the RCT program came in. And that was real thorough training. And in that training, they told us, most of this you'll never use because it's stuff that they use in nuclear reactors, nuclear submarines, but you need to know it. So it was a very extensive program then.
And tell me what it was like. I guess you couldn't see inside the buildings very well, but what was it like? What did the buildings look like when you went into the, it was 771, right? Or no, 776, right. Going in there after the fire.
It was dark. There was soot everywhere. Most of the gloves on the dry box were burned off. You didn't know anybody else. I mean, the people you went in with, you couldn't tell who was with you because of that mask we had to wear. All it had was 2 eye holes. Like I say, it was dark. It was scary. You didn't know what was going on around you because it was dark. They strung up some lights in there, bare bulbs on a wire to give us a little light. And then after I had been in there a while, and they figured I was okay to do other things, they started wanting me to climb up into the overhead to check things. That was pretty scary because I couldn't see very well. But I would be climbing up, 20 feet in the air, climbing on pipes. And people would clean something and take a swipe on it and say, did I get it cold yet? And it was either yes or no, and we went from there.
Wow. Were you nervous for your safety then, besides not knowing where you were and how to get out? Did you feel that you were at risk of exposure?
Yes. Yes, the masks were very poor. That's all we had, but they weren't very good masks. And
you were in supplied air?
No.
No.
We were in what they call an Army assault mask. It had 1 canister on the side, and then 2 eye holes, and that's it. Went over your top of your head.
And you had the white coveralls?
Yeah, we had anti-seize on, gloves. But the part that worried me was around the face because I didn't know, and they didn't really. The way we had to check it is we had a gas, and I don't remember what it was. It was in a tube, and you squirted it around, and if they coughed, you told them it leaks, go get another one. And if they didn't cough, you said, you're okay, go ahead.
So you'd squirt it right before you went in?
Yeah. But you sweat in there. And when you sweat, the mask would move. So it may have been sealed when you went in, but you never knew if it stayed sealed.
Did they check you when you came out again?
No.
They didn't want to know?
It was so contaminated when you came out, they just took it off and threw it in waste.
Wow. So how long did you work there?
In the fire area?
Yeah.
until it was cleaned up in, what was it, 69? I believe it was cleaned up then, yeah. Wait, no, it was cleaned up in 70. And I worked there the full time, between building 77 and 76.
Did you, how did you hear about the fire? Were you, it was Mother's Day, so were you celebrating with your family?
Yeah, I was at home, watching TV, watching, I don't know, a football game or something that was on. And they interrupted, and they said there's been a terrible fire at Rocky Flats, and one of the buildings burned down, and I got all these visions of, oh no, plutonium's going everywhere. And I looked out, because I didn't live very far from Rocky Flats, and I could see the smoke. And I called the plant, and I said, do you need help? And they said, yeah, we could use anybody we could get right now. So I drove out there, and that day I didn't do a whole lot other than help clean up the firemen as they came out, little stuff like that. And it was the next day, or a day or two later, that they said they needed radiation protection. And I said, I'll do that. Well, here's an instrument, go to work.
Did you figure that was safer than doing cleaning?
Mm-hmm. That's why I took it. I thought I'd rather know where the contamination is than go in there and not know and get into trouble.
So so your monitor, I mean, if everything was contaminated, how was your monitor, how did it work that you could, focus in on what they were cleaning?
Well, we had grids, and when before we'd go in, we had a map. And they'd say, this team will go here, and this team here, and this team here. And then they'd say to us, you're assigned to this team, or this team, or this team. This one's cleaning the overhead, this one's cleaning dry boxes, this one's cleaning floors. We had to change gloves a lot, because it was like being inside of a giant dry box. We took a lot of extra screens for our probes on our instruments, because they got contaminated just very quickly. Mm-hmm. And as soon as they got contaminated, we'd toss them and put another one in. And we went through a lot of gloves and a lot of screens in order to get it down to where it was finally detectable levels. At first, when we went in, we couldn't even detect what the readings were.
It was just going, or was it just clicking?
Just went
madly
off our scale.
So it was like a Geiger counter, was
yeah.
That what it was?
And we just call it, well, it's infinity. It's greater than 10 to the 6th counts per minute.
And then you would stay there as they cleaned and
yeah, until
wait for it to come down.
Until they started getting it down. Then I could tell them, well, now you've got 100,000, and now you got 50, and get it all the way down to where it was as cold as they could get it, which was usually around a few thousand, and then they would come in and paint it.
A few thousand is still not safe for
no
human exposure.
No. What our levels were then, considered safe to be like in the cafeteria or something. We took surveys of the tables and everything, was 50 disintegrations per minute. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot less than even 100 counts per minute.
When, after they painted it, was it down to 0?
Yes, most of the time it would go down to 0. We'd still go back and check it, and occasionally it would bleed through the paint, and we'd start picking up count again. So they'd scrub it a little more and paint it again.
Was it lead paint?
I don't know what it was. Could have been.
That would be the best kind.
That
right?
would have been good, yeah.
I'm just going to move this a little bit. I don't like. Let's see if I can get you by the brick wall. Let's move a chair here. That is going to be much better. Much better. Let's grab a chair. Okay, we're on again.
One incident I remember, there were some gloves that didn't get burned off. And so we tried to clean them so that we may be able to use them again on the dry boxes. And somebody went in there and cut them. took some kind of a shear or a scissors or something and cut him. And the FBI was called in because they said that was an act of national sabotage. And what it probably was is somebody didn't want to scrub them, so they figured if I cut it, we'll just change it and put new ones. And so I got called in by the FBI in a room, and it was very funny. They just started talking casually to me, how you doing, how long you worked here, have a family, and then all of a sudden one of them said, "Did you cut those gloves?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, you were in there, who did?" And I said, "All I see when I'm in there is 2 eyeballs. I don't see any face. I have no idea who was in there when I was in there." So they let me go, and they never did find out who cut him.
So who would have called it in?
Somebody in the company, a supervisor or somebody, must have called it in and said that they found all the gloves cut that weren't cut. So another FBI issue.
Well, that sounds like interesting. Oh, I guess it wasn't your introduction to Rocky Flats, but you had been there just
probably a year and a half when that happened.
Yeah, that seems like a good introduction to.
Yeah, it was a big change from
Yeah.
working in a laboratory under controlled conditions to working in essentially a great big dry box.
Yeah.
And after we got it cleaned somewhat, we started figuring people were getting too much exposure, and so we started putting them in teams of breathing air. And they'd go in and they're breathing air, and they'd be in there a couple of hours. They'd clean as much as they could. They'd come to the door, they'd bring us the samples of what they cleaned, and we'd tell them, yeah, you either got it clean or no, it needs some more work. But their time was up. So we'd undress them, dress a new crew, and put those in. So that's how it went for many months.
So, as in general, I guess during the cleanup from the fire and afterwards, what was your relationship like with the guys you worked with? Was it adversarial ever? I mean, did they not want to be monitored, or was it always?
No.
They were always happy to have you there? And
everybody was happy with everybody. Everybody got along with everybody. We knew we had a job to do. We wanted to get it done as quick as possible. And everybody got along fine. There was never any problems.
So, so they were happy to have you there, to be there to sort of make sure that their backs were covered?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they always wanted a monitor around. That's what we were called then, was monitors. And they'd look around and make sure that there was a monitor somewhere where they could see them. They wanted us present.
So after the fire, what did you do next?
I got a break. They put me on site survey, which is driving around in a truck, checking things outside, checking shipments that they want to send off site. I worked on that for a while. Then I went into building 886. I went into building 444. I worked basically every building on the plant site. 991. While I was on site survey, I worked everything out of the plutonium area. And during that time, we discovered things like the barrel field was leaking. You've heard of probably.
The 903 pad, that's that one?
Yep.
Yeah. So you guys found that?
Yeah, we found it.
How did that come about?
Well, they went out there to do something, and they found that the bottoms were gone out of the barrels. They just melted, eaten away. So they told us we needed to do a survey east of the barrel field. And they gave us a map with 1-foot grids all the way to the security fence. And they said, take a step, put your probe down, write the reading down, pick it up, take a step. We want every square foot monitored. Well, I did it the best way I knew. I dropped it on the ground, on the dirt. When I turned in my survey, I was told by a supervisor, "You don't expect me to turn this in, do you?" And I said, "Why not?" He says, "It's too contaminated. I can't turn that in." And I said, "Well, I put the probe every foot." He said, "I wanted you to put it on tumbleweeds and grass, not on the ground." And I said, "No, that's not right. My survey is accurate. I stand by it." So what they did then is they brought in dump trucks of dirt and covered everything up with dirt. That was the end of that.
How much dirt?
3 feet.
Oh, interesting.
3 feet of dirt. And then the tires on the big trucks were contaminated. And before we could get them to clean them, they left the plant site.
Wow.
So we never knew exactly what happened to the tires after that. And then another incident on site survey, I was walking around. They had a mound area. And I was always wondered, what's in that mound? And so one day I was just walking around it, and I saw the rim, just a little bit of a rim of a barrel. And I thought, oh, I didn't know there was any barrels buried out here. So I scraped away the dirt and got the whole top of the barrel, got a wrench out of the truck and unscrewed the bung, got a stick off of the ground and put it down in, pulled it out, and it was very nice, clean oil. Took a sample of it, took it back to the building and counted it, and it was fairly cold. I mean, cold enough for discard. And then I got to thinking, I wonder if stuff settled. So I went back with a long stick, went all the way down to the bottom of the barrel, and when I pulled it out, about 12 to 14 inches of the bottom of the stick was black. I took that back to the lab and counted it, and it went off scale. Our instrument wouldn't count that high. So that's when I raised questions about, what did you bury out there in this mound? And they said, well, it's uranium primarily, maybe some plutonium, stuff that we didn't have time to, or didn't want to clean up. And I said, well, now that I know that it's there, I suggest it be cleaned up. You can't just leave it there. We already had 903 pad. We're asking for another one. So they ended up digging up all the barrels, sending them through building 774 to take out all the radioactive material, and they cleaned it all up. It was a big project. So we found things. We'd find things like they had contractors excavating. For one instance, in building 559, when they were starting to build that, and I got a call to go over there in the excavation hole because they found something they didn't know what it was. Well, when I got over there, it was what we call the hemishell. It was one of the parts of a bomb.
Part of it,
it was the shell.
Okay.
And it was contaminated, and it had been buried. I called security, and they said, get everybody out of here, that's top secret. You're not even supposed to see that. So we suited them up. They went down in and they bagged up all these hemishells. Said they would get rid of them because they were classified material and they were contaminated. And then we cleaned up the contractors that had found them, and we went in and searched and didn't find any more, and they did their work. But this happened in other holes too that they excavated out on the plant site. We would find hemishells that were buried.
How did they get there? What was the...
Nobody ever told me how they got there. I asked, I said, why would you bury a contaminated top secret part? And they said, we don't know how they got there.
We never got to the bottom of it.
No, they wouldn't tell us much.
And so that was top secret, that because of the dimensions and stuff are all classified. That's why you weren't allowed to be near it. So the site survey was
interesting.
Did you think it was going to be a quiet job?
Oh yeah, it's supposed to have been a quiet job. It was like, oh, now I get to relax for a few months. I'm on site survey. All I have to do is check final shipments that are going off site. It was far from that. It was quite busy.
Was the final shipment part of the job easier? Or?
Yeah. What they did there is they would check the barrels and stuff in the building that they were originated in. They would send them up to the shipping building. We would have to check them as a final check to make sure that everything was okay. We would do a smear on them, and then we'd do a gamma and a neutron reading on them to make sure that what was on the label was actually what was in the barrel. So that was a pretty easy. You were just checking somebody else's work, and 99.9% of the time it was right. So that's why site survey was, you just got to ride around in the truck all day in the summer. It was nice. It didn't turn out that way for me.
So did you end up checking more things than they had really, was it beyond your job description, the things you were finding, or did they tell you go out and just check randomly with your probe?
No, they never told us to check randomly. They would tell us, like, well, we got something over in this building, we want you to go check that. And somebody got contaminated, we want you to go to medical and help the doctors with the wound to get it cold. Just things like that. And when I found the barrel field, I was told, why were you out there looking? And I said, I was just curious, and I saw the rim of a barrel and I wanted to know what was in it. Well, you weren't supposed to be looking. That's not part of your job. And I said, well, I thought finding contamination was part of my job. And that's what I found.
So how are your relations with your supervisors?
Not very good. Not very good, because I was always telling them, I wasn't afraid to tell them you're wrong. And I'll write my report and you write your report, but I will tell them that you are wrong and what I actually found. So the supervisors and I didn't get along very well. Consequently, the union finally saw that I didn't buckle under to supervision. So they asked me if I would become a member of the Joint Company Union Safety Committee. So I took that job on. And while I was doing that job, I was finally asked to co-chair the committee. And then while I was doing that, the union decided they wanted to start a program to help people that were alcoholics. So they wanted an employee assistance program. So I volunteered for that too. And they sent me to school. I got my EAP diploma. So I had counseling employees and fighting with the company about contamination problems.
Did you get paid to do that stuff, or this was
just
all...
my regular pay as a radiation monitor?
And did you do less of the radiation monitor work and more
of this?
Oh, okay, so
yeah.
You didn't have to stay after work to do it.
Well, they didn't like that, because the bosses would say, we want you back in the building, and I'd say, talk to upper management in building 11. This is what they say I have to do. You really don't have control now over me. So they couldn't force me back in. I would work overtime. I would go back in and work Saturdays or Sundays. But my primary job was not in the building anymore. I went in the buildings, but it was to make sure that a job was going safe, and if it wasn't, I would stop the job, tell supervision, you can't do it this way, and if you continue to do it that way, I will pull all the union people out of the building. And then they'd say, well, what do you recommend? And I'd recommend, and we'd talk, and then we'd come to a place where it was safe, and they'd go ahead and do it.
So I gather the union was an important force in your life. Did you feel that it protected you from repercussions of your work, that standing up to supervisors that wouldn't have had, you would have maybe lost your job had the union not been there?
I was fired 3 times. 3 times I was fired because they didn't like something that I found. And the union would go back and say, well, what he found was correct. And if you fire him, the press is going to find out. And I don't think you want that. So then they drop it.
So what were the 3 instances?
Oh, let me think. One time they were doing a job in building 771, and union members called me and said, this isn't safe. We don't want to do it this way. Would you come down? So I went down there and I looked at it and I told the supervision, I said, if you do it this way, you're going to contaminate a lot of people and you're going to contaminate a lot of the area. This is not the way to do it. And they said, it's already set up and we're doing it. And I said, no, you won't do it. I will pull every union member out of the building and you'll have no help. And they called me up to what was then 11 building, administration, into my big boss, and he said, you're fired. You stopped a job that had to get done. So you are fired. You're terminated. And another union member was with me, and he said, well, what he did was right. And we got a lot of people that will swear to that. So if you fire him, we're going to call a press conference. So they backed off of that. One time I had a handlebar mustache and sideburns, and they said that my respirator wouldn't fit correctly that way. And I put it on, and they put the smoke all around me. And they really smoked me. I couldn't see, and I didn't cough. And I said, the rules state that if I don't cough with that smoke all around me, that the seal, then I can wear it this way. And my boss said, you go up to medical and shave the sideburns and shave the handlebars off or you're fired. And I took off my instrument and I said, I guess I'm fired because I'm not going to shave. And this time it was a supervisor that came to me and said, don't leave the plant site. You will be fired if you leave. He said, just do what they say for now. Go shave, and we'll fight it later. So I went up and I shaved, and I got my job back a second time.
Did you ultimately get to wear your handlebar?
I got to wear it a little longer than I wanted, yeah. Then I wanted to wear it a little longer, and they let me finally. But that started a whole new respirator fit program because they decided the smoke is no longer adequate, so they started a respirator fit chamber where you would go in and do different exercises with the respirator on in a room filled with the harmless smoke, but it would tell if the respirator leaked while you were doing contortions and whatever, and it was a much better way to find out if our respirators did fit. So something good came of it.
Yeah. So
Oh, the other time I was going to be fired, we used to have the radiation monitors would keep thermoluminescent detectors, film badges, in our office. And if we had a special job where we thought someone was going to get contaminated, we could issue that badge to them and log it down. And after the badge, after the job, we would send it up as a special to find out how much they got exposed to. Well, one day I was doing a routine survey and I came across a source that read 129 Röntgen, extremely high. And I went to my boss and he said, there's nothing near that hot at any building on this plant site. And I said, well, you come and look at the reading. And he went and he read it and he says, I'll be darned, you're right, it's 129R. So he left and I went and got one of the new film badges. And I hung it right there where the source was at 129R, Röntgen per hour. I left it 1 hour. took it off, sent it up as a special, came back cold. No problem, less than 0.5. And I questioned it. I said, wait a minute. I got a supervisor that verified the reading. I hung it there for 1 hour. It should have come back 129R. What's wrong with your new badges? And they said, you had no right to do that. And I said, I can issue those badges. I've always been able to. And they said, you're fired again. And what I did is I went up again to the administration, and I told them, if you really want to fire me, then I'm going to tell people that these badges aren't adequate because it didn't detect the radiation that it should have. So again, they backed off and didn't fire me, and supposedly did some work to the badges where they would detect better.
Supposedly.
Supposedly.
I've heard lots of stories about the badges not working.
They don't. They didn't. I was in exposures where I took my own readings and I know what I had, and it would come back less than 0.5. And I'd say, why is it less than that when these are my readings on the jobs I was on for the month? And they said, because you're a radiation monitor, and radiation monitors do not get exposed to high radiation. You get zeros, no matter what.
Do you think that intentionally designed the badges not to work, or do you think they just couldn't get it to work?
I don't think they could get it to work properly. And they did tell me finally, they said there are certain ranges that the badges will not read certain energies of radiation. And I said, well, that's fine if we're in a criticality and that's the range of radiation. We have nothing and we'll die. And they said, well, we're working on that. We're going to try to improve it. They never got back to me and said, yeah, we did or we didn't. But many times my readings would come back cold when I knew, because I'm the one taking the readings, I knew that I should have had exposure. And they would say no exposure.
So, and the badges were what the health physics people used to determine whether somebody had had too much exposure? Too much exposure
to gamma, X-ray, or neutron radiation, penetrating radiation.
And that's not something that they'd be able to detect in lung counts, but could they detect that through other body counts too?
Yes.
Okay. So they were also checking people's body counts?
Well, yeah, but that didn't work either. And I had an incident that happened to me. I was standing in a room talking to a guy, no respirator on, he didn't either, and there was an explosion. And my instrument went, which meant it's saturated. It's infinity, my instrument, I can't use it. Then the air monitors started going off around the room. And I thought, uh-oh, we've been in a big plutonium explosion. So I went outside the door, and I had a two-way radio, and I called my supervisor, told him we have a fire and explosion, we need help. They sent people back, got me stripped down, got me into the shower, and the other guy cleaned us as best they could. When we got out of the shower, I took my own nasal swabs and put them in the counter, and they were over 100,000 counts per minute in each nose, each nostril. So then they sent me to body count. I went into body count. I was there in my 30-minute body count, and I came out and they said, you're cold. You didn't get anything inside.
They swab your nose too?
No, it was still there. And I said, well, I just swabbed my nose before I came up, and it was greater than 100,000 counts per minute. I didn't have a respirator on, and every air monitor in that room alarmed. And you tell me I don't have anything in me? And they said, maybe we better count you again. They put me in again, counted me, and when I came out, they said, you were right. You did get an intake of plutonium. We found it. Okay, what do we do now? They said, well, we'll give you sheets and pillowcases and you go home. And I went home and slept on their sheets and pillowcases. Came back the next morning, they put me in the body counter and they said, wow, it's all gone. Overnight, it all disappeared. That's what I ever got out of that.
So do you have a body burden now that...
I have some in me. They finally admitted that I have some.
Did you have to work to get them to admit it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I have cancer. And it's in remission now. And the doctor, when he found it, he said, well, this had to come from Rocky Flats. And he said, I'll testify to it. You're too young to have this kind of cancer. Because I was like 48 years old.
What kind of cancer was it?
Prostate. And I went back to the company, and then they got this Compensation Act where they're supposed to give employees that have suffered some kind of radiation exposure or chemical exposure, they're supposed to give us $150,000. Well, mine's being denied. And a friend of mine who had his lung removed and is dying, his was denied also.
On what grounds?
They just said it's not the type of cancer that you could have got here. And both his doctor and my doctor said, that's where you got it. And they're saying, no, you didn't get it here. So that's another joke, another story.
You still fighting them on that, or is that done?
Oh, I'll probably file a protest. But the last call I got, they said it's going to be denied. Just be prepared.
I'm sorry. And so what did you have to do to convince them that you had a body burden?
They just finally said, well, over the years you've accumulated enough because you've worked in the plutonium area. You know, I worked in the plutonium area 25, 30 years. And they said, because of that, we're just going to assign you a portion of a body burden because you've been in there. You had to pick something up.
How do they find it? How do they look for it? Is it in your urine or in your...
They find it with a body count. And see, that thing was not a body counter. They called it a body counter. It was a lung counter. That's what it counted, was lungs. Plutonium goes to the bones.
So it's a scan? Is that what it is?
No, they
put you in a machine?
Put you lay on the table and they put the two things over your chest. And they count you for 30 minutes. And they said it was a whole body counter. But it wasn't. We found out it was a lung counter, and plutonium is a bone seeker. So they never really did give us a body count to see what's in our bones.
So when you say us, everybody who worked at Rocky Flats is getting the same thing?
Yep.
Who delivers this, gives you this count? It's at Rocky Flats, or it was at Rocky Flats?
It was at Rocky Flats.
A lab there or something?
Yeah, it was up by medical building, and they had a room that they had built out of pre-World War II battleship plate, because there was no plutonium in the air before World War II, so that they could use that plate to shield out all other radiation and supposedly just pick out what was in you. But for all these years they told us it was whole body, and you know, finally toward the end I found out it's not. It just goes into my lung, and what's in my bones is where the plutonium's going to be.
So can you get that? Could you hire somebody else to do that? Can you? Is there a device that can actually count what's in your bones?
There is. It's at I believe Livermore Lab, but I don't think they would let us go there.
Because they don't want to pay for it.
Right.
Well, that's distressing. I'm sorry. So I guess back to the union. So do you think without the union, would Rocky Flats have been a lot less safe place to work?
Oh, without a doubt. They would have killed people. I have no doubt. They were stopped so many times from doing something dangerous that it's uncountable. I mean, just the 4 or 5 years that I was on the committee, I was on call 24 hours a day. I'd get calls at 2 in the morning to get out to the plant site because they were trying to do something that they knew wouldn't be done during the day. And I'd have to go out and stop it.
What sort of things?
Oh, trying to open barrels out of a room without a containment room. A lot of times when we opened those barrels, they had pressure and they would explode. And then the air monitors would go off again. So they would try to do that stuff on the off shifts sometimes, thinking, well, you know, there's not as many people around, we'd probably get away with it.
This is a management decision, or this is some lower level supervisor who's just trying to cut corners?
It was probably management. Yeah.
What, and their goal was just production, production, production?
Yes, that's all they wanted. They wanted to meet their production schedule because they got bonuses if they met the schedule. So until, and this joint company union safety committee was mandated by Congress due to all the safety concerns that the union brought to Congress. Mm-hmm. And Congress looked into them and said, we need better control out there. So we will have a company union safety committee. They will jointly look into safety problems. And some of the people on the committee were, company side, were very good. Some of them didn't care.
This is during Rockwell's time?
Yeah. So it did help. It was a great, well, I personally think it probably saved lives. And I know it saved a lot of contamination from going outside.
I've heard, spoken with people in management who said that the union could sort of go overboard with rules, like, or not necessarily managers, maybe it's a researcher and you can't do this, the lab tech has to do that. Do you think that there were times when the union made things more difficult to get done, or was it always sort of a safety?
It was always a safety issue. We never made it more difficult. If we did something, it was to do it on the side of safety. And we never could tell somebody, you can't do it. I mean, if your boss says you're to do it, that's between you and your boss. I can tell you, you can't do it because it's not safe, mm-hmm. and nobody else can do it either.
What about like job description things? I mean, weren't there certain...
Well, then they'd get into grievances with their supervision. Uh-huh. But we stayed out of that part of it. We just were mainly, yeah, it's safe. No, it's not. And then on certain hot jobs, really hot jobs, we'd be in there right with them, holding the meter and telling them, okay, you got 2 minutes left, 1 minute, you're out. They'd come out of the gloves. They had their exposure for a month in like 10 minutes. I was right there with them. The next guy would come in, I'd count him, time's up. We went through every lab tech in the building, and then we had to shut it down, rope it off, and wait till the next month when they start over with zeros. Magically, it all goes away in a month. You can be exposed very high this month, and the first of next month you're okay again. So we do it all over again until we finally got this certain part split into 4 pieces where it wasn't so radioactive. And I was there the whole time taking the readings. I was cold. I never got contaminated, but everybody else did. And I questioned that. Well, you're a radiation monitor. You aren't supposed to get exposed.
Were the radiation monitors, do you think that they were more at risk than other people, or?
No, I think we were safer, but I think nobody got their true readings. Nobody got to know what they really got exposed to. To this day, people still don't know.
So, do you think Rocky Flats was a safe place to work, all in all?
It was fairly safe, yeah. Especially, you know, when the union, Joint Company Union Safety Committee got involved, it became a much safer place.
And when was that?
In the 80s, early 80s. That's when it really, that's when I felt safer to go out there. Because I knew that if I questioned something, the company wasn't either going to say, you're fired, or we'll move you to a building where there's no overtime, so you're going to get a cut in pay. You either do the job or you get that one of the other consequences. Well, when we got the safety committee, we could call them and they would come in and say, yeah, it's not safe, he's right. You're not going to move him. He's going to stay right in this building, he's going to work here, and the job will be reevaluated to be done safely. So yes, it became much safer.
And that's in terms of both sort of immediate industrial accidents and long-term exposure, or both?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think that the public perception of Rocky Flats in that era was justified? I think the public has a perception that it was a very unsafe place.
Well, considering what we handled, it was dangerous. We had every hazardous chemical known to mankind on that plant site because I did the inventory on the safety committee. And what I found was every hazardous substance known to man was there. And yes, they were stored improperly, they were used improperly at times. The training wasn't real good in the beginning. People tried to cut corners. So yeah, in the beginning up until the early 80s, mid 80s, it was pretty unsafe. It got safer after that. But what they're doing right now to it is very unsafe. And that's why I've been coming up to these meetings every month, telling them, and the people that were just fired a week ago that have been there right now working, telling them what's going on out there. They're leaving stuff. They're putting dirt over it and leaving it. It's still there and it's going to come out someday. And they're not listening again. They've got a mandate to close Rocky Flats by a certain timetable, which is now. And regardless of what's there, it's closed. There's stuff buried out there that would scare me. I would never go out on that plant site now.
So some of the stuff that you found during the site surveys is what you're thinking about?
Well, some of the stuff I found when I was on the safety committee. I was privy to a map one time. I heard the map existed. I asked to see it, me and another committee member. We were refused. We asked for 3 or 4 months, we were refused. Finally, we told them we would file under the Freedom of Information Act to see it. And they said finally, okay, you can see it. You take no pens, no pencils, no paper. We're going to put you in the room and lock the door, just the two of you. You can see it, but nothing will come out of that room of what's on that map, except what you might remember. I was, when I saw the map, I was amazed of how much plutonium and americium and uranium and acetones and solvents were buried out there. These were all pits that they dug and buried the stuff. And I keep trying to tell these people that are cleaning it up where these pits are. And they say, well, we sampled down to 6 feet and we didn't find anything. And I said, I told you that they were down 20 to 30 feet. They drove a D8 cat in there to scoop the hole out, and you couldn't see the cat, it was so deep. And that's where they put the stuff and then covered it. My uncle saw it happen. He was one of the original ones out there. And I said the one in particular I read had plutonium, americium, uranium, acetone, various solvents, metals. And when I asked Rocky Flats at that time, I asked supervision, well, what are you going to do with it? You know it's there. And they said, we don't know because we're afraid if we try to dig it up, it may burn or explode. And they're leaving it. It's going to move. Someday, they're going to find it. It's going to move.
How did you find the map? How did you find out about the map?
My uncle. He told me, oh yeah, we used to bury stuff all over here in the early days. And he said, they kept a log of it somewhere, he said. Well, then I said, I want to see the log or the map. And they did finally acknowledge that it existed, but I couldn't see it. And when I saw that map laid out on that table, I just went, there's that many burial sites, and they know what's in them, and they're leaving them there? They had exact numbers, grams of what plutonium, of uranium, americium, how many gram quantities were in each of these pits.
Were they in barrels, or they just tossed it all in there together?
They put it in a barrel, but in those days we didn't pack barrels like we did now. The barrels we pack now probably last 50, 60, maybe more years. In those days they put a plastic liner, a trash can liner, plastic bag in the barrel, put the stuff in the barrel, tied the top of the bag shut, put a lid on, sealed it, put it in a hole. And in that bag went liquids, solids, whatever they wanted to get rid of right then. I don't think the barrels are there anymore because it's been that many years. I think that there's a lot of plutonium and stuff under the ground there with mixed acids and chemicals that are very hazardous.
And you wouldn't be able to detect them from the ground. It's too far down.
Well, they could. They don't want to, I think. I think they have ways to detect them. Huh. I told them if you just drill a core sample where I tell you and go down 20 to 30 feet, you'll find lots of stuff. And they won't do it.
You still remember where?
The main one, the one that scared me the worst. I remember that one. And it was right outside the east guard post.
It was outside the
perimeter fence.
Wow.
And they marked it. At one time they had these little flags around it. So it had been marked. They knew it was there. It's still there. It'll be there.
So is anybody responding to the things you're saying? Or I mean, is anybody listening to you?
I started last February, and I have it all documented at home. I started writing to the congressmen and senators last February. I finally got Congressman or Representative Udall's secretary or aide to respond to me, finally. But she never got me the answers. I wrote her all the questions. She said, you know, she couldn't find them. I wrote them again. She said they wouldn't answer them. I wrote them again. She said she'd give them to somebody else. They're still not answered. They have now been given to all representatives, senators, and congressmen. I faxed them a new copy that I rewrote 2 weeks ago, and I was told today, I'm not going to help you. You're on your own. I've given it to DOE and I've given it to the representatives, or congressional representatives. This was by a member of the Rocky Flats Coalition. And he's the one I sent it to because he said he would try to help me get answers. He told me today, and I have a witness, was standing right next to me. He says, I'm not going to help you. You're on your own. He said, I faxed them to a few people, but that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to help you get any answers.
I'm going to stop.